chasing. And so now what I'm going to do is I'll share my screen. If I can find, oh, I see what I'm doing here. Hang on for a second. One moment. Let me just share this one more time. And okay, now I hope all of you can see that. And I'll go into slideshow mode, and away we go. And again, I want to thank the Stores Library for the invitation again to talk to all of you about this wonderful spectacle and how I have been spending my time in chasing these things down, solar eclipses. And again, the name of the talk is Adventures of an Eclipse Chaser, and my name again is Joe Rao. All right, so who among us have not, if you have not ever seen one before, who would not be uh, blown away, so to speak, by the spectacle of a total eclipse? No spectacle that nature has to offer can rival a total eclipse of the sun for sheer drama and excitement. It's not just something that you see, it's something that, well, for those of you who have been to a total eclipse, realize it's an experience. Every fiber of you becomes involved during those precious moments of totality. And of course, at the beginning and the end, we have those remarkably beautiful diamond ring effects that grace our skies. They are indelibly implanted into our memories, and they remain a lifetime once we have been there where the shadow of the moon has struck the earth. Now, as was mentioned at the start, I've been to 13 eclipses. The last one that I went to was literally down at the bottom of the world, and that was in Antarctica. Here you see my very best friend, and she is my best friend, in spite of the fact that on September 1st, we will be marking our 40th year of marital bliss. My wife, Renata, she and I traveled to Antarctica for a solar eclipse in December of 2021. And you might see off next to my shoulder there, you might see a sea lion basking in the relatively warm sunshine. I say relatively warm. In December, it is the beginning of summertime in the southern hemisphere. And on this particular day, although we look bundled up for, frigid temperatures, it actually was quite balmy. It was only around 30 degrees. But anyway, here we were. That was one of my 13 adventures to chase down an eclipse. Another was in August of 1999, and this shot was taken some moments or some minutes after sunrise. The sun came up looking not like a big orange ball, but like a skinny crescent, and within a few minutes, the moon moving in front of the sun, obscuring it for a total of 50 seconds, totally obscuring the sun. You can see the beginnings of the diamond ring effect here, and it was a beautiful, beautiful sight to see. I was on a ship a few hundred miles off the coast of Nova Scotia to catch this view of a total eclipse. Now, here's a very distinguished looking gentleman. We're looking at a photograph of this person taken way back in the 19th century. This gentleman's name is Charles A. Young, and he is a professor who studied astronomy and studied the sun. And on August 7th of 1869, Professor Young journeyed to Burlington, Iowa with his prism spectroscope. Professor Young was hoping to discover what the corona, that crown of light that appears during the total phase of an eclipse, what the corona was composed of. So he and his assistant, William Harkness, was there to observe the eclipse, and Harkness handed Professor Young, just after the sun went into totality, a lantern, because during a total eclipse, it can get rather dark. So he was handing Professor Young a lantern to read one of his instruments, the micrometer head, moments after totality set in, and then looking up to the sky, and looking up toward the totally eclipsed sun, Harkness suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my God! Look at that!" Well, after the eclipse was over, and Professor Young wrote in his notebook what had happened, he said, "I looked over my shoulder for just an instant and beheld the most beautiful and impressive spectacle upon which my eyes ever rested. It could not have been more than 5 seconds, but the effect was so overwhelming as to drive away all certain recollections of what I had just seen. I cannot describe the sensation of surprise and mortification and personal imbecility and wasted opportunity that overwhelmed me when the sunlight flashed out." So I guess what happened was that Professor Young was looking at his spectroscope, taking notes, trying to take in what he was seeing on his instruments, and then he took one look up at that sun, that totally eclipsed sun, and forgot everything that he had just seen. I can only assume that Professor Young became so emotionally overwrought that it may have produced a sort of paralysis. I can visualize this old man just staring, absolutely transfixed, and down the drain probably went many days and many weeks of preparations and dry runs in advance of the eclipse. That has not only happened to Professor Young, it has probably happened to people before him, and I'm sure after him as well. And there are people who have seen eclipses and have become hooked on the phenomenon. Here you see one young man. In fact, that young man is speaking to you right now. This is over 60 years ago. At the time, look at that clunker that's behind me here. uh, I was just about 7 years old, living in the Throgs Neck part of the Bronx of New York City. And on a summer day in late July of 1963, my grandfather pulled me aside and said, "Later today, we're going to see an eclipse." And of course, I did not know at that time exactly what an eclipse was. And I got my very first lesson in celestial mechanics that morning at the kitchen table. My grandfather took the salt and pepper shaker down from the kitchen shelf and he made a fist. The fist was the sun, the salt shaker was the moon, the pepper shaker was the earth. And he said, "Later today, the salt shaker, or in this case the moon, is going to get between the earth and the sun and block out a good part of the sun." This was not going to be a total eclipse from the Bronx, but he said we were going to see about 90% of the sun covered during this eclipse. And he said, "I think you'll find it very interesting." Well, that day, the eclipse was a major, major news story. And here you see kids who are gathering boxes together to make were pinhole projectors so that they could watch the eclipse. What they would do was they would allow the pinhole to shine through the box. They'd put the box over their head, and they would see a miniature version on the other side of the box of what was going on in the sky. Other people looked through darkened pieces of film up at the sun, and by doing so, they were able to look directly at the sun with those dark photographic negatives, which in our era doesn't seem to exist anymore. Now, where I was in the Bronx, it was a rather cloudy day and could have been rather disappointing. But as the moon began to cover the maximum amount of sun, as the eclipse was reaching its peak, well, guess what? The sun broke through the cloud cover and provided us with a very, very interesting sight, a very interesting view. And there you see it. This was photographed from New York City, and you could see a crescent sun shining through the rather cloud-filled sky that day. And people, of course, projecting the image onto a piece of paper using binoculars. This was the peak of the eclipse right here. And it was a very, very interesting sight. In fact, it was so interesting to me that after the eclipse was over and we sat down to have our supper, I couldn't stop talking. I told my grandfather, I said, "That was really neat. That was really something to see something like that." And my grandfather said, "Well, you know, I think that I made a mistake." He said, "It was spectacular in a way here from New York, but what I should have done is we should have gone to Maine, because in Maine, for that 1963 eclipse, the dark shadow of the moon, the umbra, went right across the middle of Maine. And if you were in that band, approximately 55 miles wide, you would have seen a total eclipse that would have lasted for just about 1 minute. And my grandfather, well, he had experience with total eclipses. You see, when he was 16 years old in 1925, there was a total eclipse of the sun that passed over New York City. And here you see the front page of the New York Times the following day, January 25th, 1925, and it tells of the eclipse, shows the progress of the eclipse, banner headlines. The eclipse was a few seconds late in its arrival, but a brilliant show seen from land, sea, air, thrilling the millions of New York City. And scientists then, after the eclipse was over, studying the data. My grandfather saw that eclipse from the Upper East Side of Manhattan on the East River Drive, which is now known as the FDR Drive. And there you see darkness falling at 9:11 a.m. on that Saturday morning in 1925. And in telling the story, my grandfather said, "Boy, I tell you, that was a spectacular sight. I'd love to see another one." And then he said to me, "You know what? The next time we have one that comes close to New York, I'm going to take you. That's a promise. I'm going to take you to see a total eclipse of the sun." Well, in 1972, he kept his promise. We went on a trek up into Canada. We went up Interstate 87 in New York State. We stopped for a night in Montreal, and then we stopped again in Quebec City, and then we took a leisurely 5-hour trip along the Gaspé Peninsula up into the center of the eclipse track, which passed across a little town called Cap Chat, Quebec. And it was there, just outside of town, that my grandfather and I, my grandmother, my mom, and my sister, we all were gathered there to watch and wait for a total eclipse of the sun. Here you see my grandfather and my grandmother looking at the sun through a piece of black and white film as the partial phases got underway. This sequence of photos of the eclipse as it progressed, not taken by me, but was taken by who would turn out to be one of my oldest and dearest friends, a gentleman who is today my friend, Dr. Glenn Schneider. Glenn and I were only in high school way back then in 1972, and he was only about, I guess, 500 or 600 yards away from me and my family, photographing the eclipse. And you know, as the eclipse progressed, the sun became more and more covered, not just by the moon, but also by clouds. And in fact, this photograph you see in the lower right-hand corner, that was the last picture that Glenn took, the last view of the sun that Glenn had from his position before a cloud cover came along and completely obscured the sun just as the eclipse was reaching total phase from his vantage point. But again, I wasn't where Glenn was. I was in the same area, but I was about, well, we later determined I was about 500 or 600 yards away. And that played a big role, a big difference in what I saw versus what Glenn saw. Because while Glenn got skunked and missed the total eclipse, from where I was, after initially ducking behind a dark cloud, the sun popped out from behind the cloud about 30 seconds into the 2-minute totality. And so I was able to see 90 seconds worth of total eclipse, and it was a beautiful sight. We saw, of course, the sun and its fantastic corona, and the sky darkened enough so that we were actually in, well, the kind of a sky that you'd expect to see about 30 or 40 minutes after sunset. It gets that dark during a total eclipse of the sun. So I ended up seeing it. Glenn did not. And we didn't know each other at the time, even though we were in the same location to watch the eclipse. But about 6 months later, there was an announcement for volunteers at the Hall of Science, which had a planetarium. And I decided to go down there to serve as a volunteer, and so did Glenn. And that's where we would go on weekends to spend time at the Hall of Science Planetarium. And that's where we got to know each other. And again, we didn't know or realize that we actually lived rather close to each other. We were both Bronx boys, Oh, here's a picture of yours truly after the total eclipse in 1972. I tell people that's a picture of me 51 years and about 100 pounds ago. That's yours truly wearing his official eclipse T-shirt, which said solar eclipse in French. Very happy because again I had seen my first total eclipse. But again, getting back to Glenn and myself, here's a photograph of he and I. This is back in the mid 70s, and we were both Bronx boys, and we lived within several miles of each other, although we never knew it until we met at the Hall of Science. Second, we were enthusiastic amateur astronomers with a special affinity for the phenomenon of eclipses. In fact, both of us were turned on to eclipses by our grandfathers, who were both immigrants to this great country of ours. My grandfather, my Italian grandfather, was Mario. Glenn's Jewish grandfather was Max, and Mario and Max were witnesses to the 1925 eclipse and conveys the beauty and grandeur to their grandsons. And interestingly, Mario and Max were both born on the very same day, Thursday, December 17th, 1908. I used to ask Glenn, I said, are you sure we're not related? If we're not related, it seems like we're joined at the hip because we've known each other now for over 50 years. Any case, in 1977, Glenn called me up on the phone and said, how would you like to see the eclipse that's going to happen later this year in October? And I said, well, I know it's not in this country. He said, no, it's not. It's in South America. And I said to him, Glenn, how in the world are we going to see an eclipse in South America? And Glenn said, we're going to run a tour. I said, a tour? He said, yeah, you and I know all about eclipses. Why don't we put an ad in one of the local astronomy magazines and make announcements at local astronomy clubs? We'll run a tour. We'll fly down to Colombia and we'll see the eclipse, and we'll probably be able to see the eclipse at a reduced price if we get enough people together to join our tour. And sure enough, we did. We got about 20 people who were coerced or cajoled into joining our group. And the game plan was that we would see totality, which would be visible in between these two lines here. That was the belt or path of total eclipse. It was going to occur to the north of the capital city of Colombia, Bogota, up in the wild and woolly country of Cundinamarca. And here's a picture of the tour leaders, yours truly on the right, Glenn on the left. The two of us at the time were 21 years old. We were tykes, tiny tykes. And I kind of wonder to this day what the people who came on our tour must have thought, because the demographic of the people who were on our tour were generally in their 40s and 50s. There are actually a couple of ladies there who were close to 80 years old. This is 1977 now. And here, you know, when they meet their tour leaders, I mean, they see a couple of kids who are running this trip. But anyway, there we were. And Glenn's birthday, in fact, his 22nd birthday would be on the day of the eclipse, Columbus Day, October 12th, which was also a national holiday in Colombia. So here you see our bus, which was a rather, you know, it rode rather tempestuously. I say that because it did break down on more than a few occasions. It was not exactly the most reliable motor vehicle. And along the way, as we headed up toward the spot where we were planning to observe the total phase of the eclipse, we stopped by several different communities and villages, got off the bus, and the people in the villages knew about the eclipse and were very excited and interested. Here I am showing one of the locals how to use a piece of darkened film to look at the sun during the partial phases of the eclipse. And here was another group that we met. I think this was in the town of Sobachoque in Colombia. And right here on the left, you see this gentleman. This was Tomas. Tomas was our bus driver. And it was right about this time that Tomas had come to Glenn and myself and said, Senors, I know how you say a quicker way to get there, a place you want to go, a shortcut. He said, would you like me to take you on that shortcut to the place where you want to see the phenomenon, the eclipse? Well, Glenn and I looked at each other, And we looked back at Tomas and we figured, well, this guy seemingly knows what he's talking about. And we said, well, yeah, if we can get to where we want to go and will give us more time to set up and everything else. So Tomas says, okay, I will take you on the shortcut. And so we got on the bus and we traveled to the place where we wanted to go. Instead of going on the main throughway or highway, we went on this shortcut. The shortcut, and Tomas did not tell us this, he had not been on this shortcut for about 7 years and didn't realize that over that 7-year time frame, the road was considerably worn out. It was actually an unpaved dirt road with lots of ruts and rocks and stones. And on the way to where we wanted to go, we encountered a heavy rainstorm, a heavy tropical storm. Now, I know a lot of you have probably been in a heavy duty rainstorm in your life. You have not been in a heavy rainstorm until you've been one down in the tropics. The rain just boomed on down, poured on down. And so much so that, well, if you are traveling on an unpaved dirt road during one of those rainstorms, you know what's going to happen eventually? Right, the dirt is going to turn to mud. And if you're on a bus, the mud eventually is going to conspire with the tires, and you're going to get stuck in the mud. And that's exactly what happened to our bus. We got stuck in the mud, and we had to actually ask the paying customers on our tour to get out of the bus and heave ho, push, 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 to push the bus out of the mud. And we couldn't go forward because the road was a quagmire. So we had to somehow, Tomas had to turn the bus around and we had to head back to where we were. We stopped at a little town called El Rosal, which is where one of the merchants was very nice to allow us to go in the back of his store and get cleaned up. But now the eclipse was getting ready to begin. So we had to find our way back to the original route on the main road and quickly take that road as far as we could before the eclipse began. We got out. We weren't going to see the full 55 seconds of totality. We were going to be off the center line, so we'd see about 38 seconds instead of 55. And the other thing was that since we just had a heavy rainstorm, when the eclipse began, this pretty much was what the sky would look like. Almost completely overcast, save for one patch of blue. That's being pointed out by one of the members of our tour group. That was it, at least at the beginning. But then, as the minutes ticked off, that one patch of blue got larger and bigger and wider. And eventually, about 15 or 20 minutes later, I'd say about 70 to 80% of the sky was beautifully clear and sunny. And we got out our equipment. Here you see Glenn showing the projection image of the sun, pointing to a sunspot. And it looked for all the world like we were out in the clear and we were going to get a good view of the eclipse. But about 5 minutes before totality, 5 minutes before the main phase of the eclipse, one single cloud, like a Goodyear blimp, drifted slowly in and over the sun, and was still over the sun when the eclipse reached its peak. Ugh! This was our view of the total phase of the eclipse. The sun was behind the cloud. You can see the cloud edge was tinted with a pinkish glow. That was the light from the solar chromosphere, a red glow that's seen just before and just after totality, and then just before totality ends, a region where hydrogen gas glows a fuchsia or pinkish red coloration. And now this reddish light was being seen as the eclipse was coming to a close on one end of the clouds. And to rub salt into the wounds, right after the total eclipse was over, the cloud moved on, the sun came back out, and we saw something that we didn't anticipate that we would see. The sun, as it was dropping down beyond the western horizon, beyond a radio tower nearby, was still in eclipse. And so we got to see a very unusual sunset, the sun setting while still in eclipse. That would have been the icing on the cake. Unfortunately for us, the cake fell flat when totality had been hidden by the clouds. And it was, I can tell you, a very quiet ride back to our hotel in South America. And when we got back to New York, we were still hurting from missing out on the uh, big eclipse in South America. But we didn't give up totally. In 2 years, in 1979, there would be another total eclipse, and this one, thankfully, was not going to be in a foreign country. This one was going to occur in our own country, the United States. Here you see the path of the total eclipse, which started in the Pacific Ocean, and then it would curve across the Pacific Northwest and on up into Canada. And this was in February of 1979. And Glenn said to me, well, since you're a meteorologist, since you're a weather forecaster, why don't you look at the weather statistics and pick out a place where you think we might have the best chance of seeing the eclipse based upon climatology, based on weather. So that's what I did. Here you see a map of part of the eclipse track, and as it turned out, the place that I had chosen for seeing the eclipse this time around was a place called Lewistown, right smack in the middle of Big Sky Country, central Montana. So our game plan was to fly into Great Falls, which you see here, and then we would take a bus, actually two buses, because we were running another tour, another trip, and this time we were going to have a total of 80 people. 80 people. Some of them were on our last trip in South America, believe it or not, but 80 people who were going to join our trip to see and hopefully observe the total eclipse of the sun in Montana, February 26, 1979. We told the people of Lewistown, which is where we were going to attempt to see the eclipse, a year in advance. We had sent a news release, a press release out to the local newspaper, the Lewistown News Argus, and we said, Lewistown is the eclipse capital of the world. And the people there really took very quickly to the fact that they were in the middle of the zone of total eclipse. And again, this is a way to tell them that we were coming. We and the 80 people that we were going to lead into their town to see the total eclipse. And a year later, here we are at the National Weather Service office in Great Falls, getting all the latest weather information from the gentleman you see in the middle of the screen there. That's William Rammer, and he was the MIC, the meteorologist in charge at the Weather Service in Great Falls. And we would get latest weather updates right on straight through the time we were there from Mr. Rammer and his staff at the Weather Service. The night before the eclipse, at the hotel that we were staying at, this was the Yogo Inn, I gave a weather briefing to everybody, and we planned to be viewing the eclipse from a place in Lewistown called the Quality Seed Factory. Big field, which would be large enough for us to see the eclipse and set up our equipment there. However, over the course of the night, the weather began to change. The latest data and the latest information, and here you see me handing it over to Glenn on the left. That's him with his girlfriend Susan. I was telling Glenn, I said, from what I see here, we may have to get out of town because clouds are approaching from the west. They may be arriving in Lewistown just as the eclipse is starting. We don't want to have what happened to us in Colombia happen to us again, get a cloud out. And so Glenn says, okay, we'll move. And so we had two buses, 80 people, and at the crack of dawn the next day, we got on board these two buses. And as you can see, they were a heck of a lot better than the bus that we had in South America. Got on our buses and then started traveling to the east. Out of Lewistown, we traveled for about an hour or so. And what we were doing, aside from trying to escape the advancing clouds from the west, but also we now had to find a place to set up for the eclipse. And again, 80 people and all this equipment. After about an hour, we came across a barn and a farmhouse nearby. Glenn got out of his bus, I got out of mine, and we hiked up to the barn where the farmhouse where we knocked on the door, and a guy opens the door up, looks at us, then looks out and sees this two big bus loads of people, and Glenn did all the talking. He said, "Excuse me, sir, we're here from New York, and we're here to watch the eclipse of the sun, which is going to happen literally any moment." could we possibly set up on your land? Because you had a nice big field there. And the guy broke into a big smile. He said, I can't believe it. You people came all the way from New York to see the eclipse? He said, well, he says, go be my guest. He said, you go out there. He said, be a different story for July and August. July and August, I probably would have a lot of stuff planted out there. But right now, the only thing I'm growing is sagebrush, grass, and snow. So you can go out there right now if you'd want. And I turned to one bus and Glenn to the other, and we gave the thumbs up. You never saw 80 people pile out of two buses as quickly as these people did, quickly setting up telescopes, binoculars, cameras, and all sorts of equipment to get in line and get ready for the total eclipse, which was going to be arriving here in just about an hour's time. Again, the partial phase of the eclipse was just about ready to begin. So here we are, standing out there using our, in the snow, using our welder's glass and filters to look at the partial phases of the eclipse. Here's yours truly with a big smile on his face because the skies were sunny, and it was very obvious that the clouds to the west were not going to reach us in time to obscure the total phase of the eclipse. So it looked like we were going to be in business and see a total eclipse of the sun in Montana. Now, what you're about to hear is from a tape recording that one of the participants in our group made during the eclipse. And what you're going to see are some images of the eclipse to go along with the recording. And we're going to start all of this about 2 minutes before totality. 2 minutes before, as you can see, the giant shadow of the moon was darkening the sky off to our west, approaching, and we're getting ready to see this incredible sight. Now, along with the sound of the narrator, his name is Keith Eichner, you're also going to hear a strange sound that sounds like something like giving off a tone, boop, boop, boop. That was WWV, a shortwave radio station giving precise shortwave time, and would give us the precise times for us to time out the occurrence of the eclipse. So here it is, 2 minutes before totality. Let's join Keith as he describes the eclipse and the shadow of the moon approaching from the west.
It is getting spooky. It does look like a storm gathering now off to the west. It's a thin crescent, about 98% now. I got a microphone here if you want it. Here we are. 1% before totality now. 1 minute before totality or less. Got it? Okay. Oh, this is unbelievable. Oh my God, I don't believe this. This is unreal. Look at this, Bailey's speech. We got Bailey's speech. Oh yeah, we got it. Oh, that's beautiful. Look at the glow in the sky. You can see that the shadow is elliptical shape. I forgot to start. Well, don't worry about it. Shit, I forgot to start mine. Just take pictures. Oh, look at the prominences. Anybody with binoculars, look at the prominences. They're absolutely fantastic. Look at the red all around. Look at the red. Oh, my God, look at the silhouette of the sky. Oh, I got to see another one. This is unreal. Here it comes. Here it comes. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. 3 cheers for the eclipse.
And as you can see, excuse me, a lot of people were very happy. A couple of guys actually picked me up and carried me around because of the fact I was the one who made the decision to get out before the clouds moved in from the west. And that evening, Glenn and I, we looked at each other. We avenged our defeat from 2 years earlier in Colombia. This was at the celebratory dinner that we had back in Great Falls. One person who was not a part of our expedition and sadly passed away last year was Terence Dickinson, who was the astronomer of Canada, I guess in the same way that Neil deGrasse Tyson is recognized as uh, the astronomer in the United States that is very popular, Terence Dickinson, was renowned across Canada. He was also very well known for books and astrophotography. And this eclipse, which he saw not from the United States but from Manitoba, Gimli, Manitoba, in Canada, he was planning to photograph a total eclipse for the first time. Well, at least that's what he was planning to do. But in the aftermath of the eclipse, Terry wrote, I was totally unprepared for the awesome beauty and overwhelming power of a total eclipse. I was overwhelmed, incapable of performing even the most rudimentary tasks. He said, I immediately became aware that I would never be able to photograph the event. It was commanding me to use every second of viewing time to let my eyes soak up the image. So I wrenched the camera off of my telescope, quickly slipped in an eyepiece into the focuser, and then gazed on what was the most stunning and awesomely beautiful astronomical image that I have ever seen. And it is for this reason that I tell people, tell first timers, if you've never seen a total eclipse before and you are planning to see this one coming up in a few weeks, I tell first timers, don't bother to try to photograph the eclipse. Rather, what you should do is just let it sweep over you and spend those precious moments drinking it all in with your eyes, with binoculars, or a telescope. In fact, Glenn told me that at his very first total eclipse in 1970, he had a pair of binoculars hanging around his neck, but he was so overwhelmed by the sight that during the 2.5 minutes of totality, he never used them. Wow. The next eclipse, the next total eclipse that I saw, came 11 years later. And this one was going to be one that was going to pass over, get this now, Siberia and the Aleutian Islands. And in Sky and Telescope magazine, they wrote that this eclipse was going to be elusive with fog and low clouds being major obstacles. The best bet, they said, would be to observe the eclipse from an aircraft. So initially I said, no, I'm not going to get involved with that eclipse. But then they also printed a map. And here is that map. And as you can see, most of the United States wasn't going to see an eclipse at all. However, if you lived in the northern and western part of the US or western Canada, yes, you would be able to see a part of it just before the sun set. Here you see some of the various phases of the peak of the eclipse: San Francisco, Billings, Montana, Honolulu, Seattle, Anchorage, Alaska. All of these places would see varying degrees of a partial eclipse if you were going to travel out to the west. But I didn't look at it from that standpoint. I noticed that here was the track of the eclipse coming down across the Aleutian Islands, continuing down, 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 and finally coming to an end over the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And I noticed that the eclipse was more or less right in between two cities, San Francisco and Honolulu. And I said to myself, I wonder if possibly there might be a commercial airline flight from Honolulu to San Francisco, or vice versa, San Francisco to Honolulu, that might be in the right position to pass through the shadow of the moon and give passengers on board the aircraft a chance to see a total eclipse. So I was living in Levittown, Long Island back then. I went to my local library and I asked the reference librarian if they had a copy of this book. This book is the OAG, the Official Airline Guide. This is an amazing book. I don't know if they still print it anymore, but back in 1990, this was published in every month. It was about the size of a Queens or Brooklyn phone directory, a Yellow Pages directory, and it had page after page. If you, for example, wanted to know how you could fly from Omaha, Nebraska to Tokyo, Japan, this book would tell you. This book would have a listing of every flight going to and from Omaha to Tokyo, all the times listed, and they did that for every major airport, every city, not just in the United States, but around the world. So what I did was I spent a couple of hours at the library trying to find an airline or airlines that would travel from Honolulu to San Francisco and make a determination as to whether or not it would be possible is for us to see the eclipse. And I found one. The airline does not exist anymore. It's called American Transair. But this airline, which was based in Indianapolis, I made a couple of phone calls, and I got somebody at the airline who sounded interested. I said, you will be able to give your passengers a chance to see a sight of a lifetime on your flight 402 from Honolulu to San Francisco. You'll be able to perhaps intercept the shadow of the moon and see a total eclipse of the sun. The guy, I really got the guy very excited until I said, oh, there's one other thing I should mention, and that is that you have to delay the flight by 41 minutes. Delay the flight? Purposely delay a flight? I said, yeah, by 41 minutes. You think that's possible? Well, it got kicked upstairs to the corporate people. They discussed it. They called me back, and we discussed it together. And believe it or not, they said, yeah, why don't we? We're going to do that. And so they decided that they were going to dedicate Flight 402 on that Saturday, the 21st of July, 1990, to try to see a total eclipse of the sun. Here you see a picture of some of the people who accompanied me on that flight. Craig Small on the right, that's his flag. He is an eclipse chaser of the first magnitude. He has traveled, I've seen 13 total eclipses. Craig has seen over 30. But the thing is that he considers this flag his lucky charm. Every time he has gone to an eclipse, he's brought the flag with him, and he's never been clouded out of a total eclipse of the sun with that flag. Behind the flag is the guy who served as best man for my wedding, Sam Storch, another assiduous amateur astronomer. And on the left is my wife, Renata, who was 6 months pregnant. 6 months. My son, who would be born in October of that year, who later would become a physics teacher, a high school physics teacher, but now he was coming on board, but he was coming on board with my wife. And I tell him, that was your first eclipse. And he said, I don't remember seeing that eclipse. I said, oh, that's right. I remember now. You didn't have a womb with a view. Anyway, 3:20. That's when the flight was supposed to take off, but we were delaying it by 41 minutes. And it was left up to me to tell everybody on board the flight on the PA system why we were delaying the flight by 41 minutes. There's our captain, Captain Bob Leary. And an interesting thing, this was before 9/11. Back in 1990, believe it or not, you could actually go and knock on the door of the cockpit and walk right in and talk to the captain and navigator and whoever else was in there. Can't do that today. I think if you tried to do that today, you'd immediately be told to sit down and maybe be questioned sharply by somebody by the FAA after you landed. But that's the unfortunate earmarks of being post 9/11. But back in 1990, I was able to do that. And when I went into the cockpit after we had taken off, after we had delayed the flight, I noticed on the dashboard an LED clock that said 4:13. Now, mind you, I knew that we were going to intercept the eclipse. At least the game plan was we were going to reach a point over the Pacific Ocean at 4:10 Greenwich Mean Time. And yet on Captain Leary's dashboard, I'm seeing 4:13. So I pointed that and I said, why does it say 4:13? And he said, oh, I was going to tell you about that. He said, you see, we had a Continental Airlines flight cut in front of us just before we were ready to take off. And so that delayed us a few minutes. So we're going to get to the place where you want to see the eclipse from over the Pacific, but we're not going to get there at 4:10. We're going to get there at 4:13. That'll be all right, won't it? And he must have noticed immediately that that wasn't all right. He must have saw that my face blanched, got drained of blood. I said, well, Captain Bob, we have to be there at 4:10. You see, the shadow is traveling at thousands of miles per hour over the Pacific Ocean. And if we get there at 4:13, the shadow will already have gone past that point in the Pacific, and we will miss out on seeing the total eclipse. The sun will get very thin, but we'll miss out on totality. And so Captain Bob said, so what you're saying is we have to make up those 3 minutes, right? And I said, yes, can you? And what he did was he went into a different airway. When you see a plane flying over your house or neighborhood or wherever you happen to be, and you see high in the sky, there's a jet aircraft. The jet aircraft is actually flying along what is called an airway. Just like a highway for the cars, there are airways for the planes and jets. And so what Captain Bob did was, I'm going to go down to a little used airway over the Pacific Ocean. We're going to have to go down to 26,000 feet. And when I get down there at a lower altitude, we'll do pedal to the metal and try to make up those 3 minutes. And so that's what he did. Now, here's a video taken by Sam Storch, of the total phase of the eclipse. Remember, I said that we were shooting for totality at 4:10 Greenwich time. You already see that we're already like 11 seconds past that. But in spite of that, whatever Captain Bob did to get that plane going and catch up with the time lost when the Continental Airlines flight cut us off, he did. And you'll see now the success that we had in encountering the shadow over the Pacific Ocean. Everything worked perfectly, and you heard all the people screaming on the plane. We had people 3 and 4 deep in the aisle facing the windows that were facing the sun to get a view of this. This is a picture that I took from the plane through a 500 millimeter lens using Ektachrome film. You remember film, right? And you could see some of the prominences along the edge, the red spots along the edge of the darkened moon. And Craig Small took this shot with a wide-angle camera where you can actually see the oval shape of the shadow projected on the clouds. See how dark the clouds below us looked, and the corona right in the middle of the shadow. After the eclipse, when we landed in San Francisco, the flight crew, Captain Bob, his navigator on the right, Frank Thomas, and the crew, the flight attendants, posing for a photograph, and there you see him holding Craig's eclipse flag. I might also point out that there were a number of people there who were more interested in the movie, and on this particular flight they were showing a movie which won an Oscar, actually, the best picture of 1989, and that was Driving Miss Daisy. And the film ended just before the total eclipse. Sam later said to a reporter at the New York Times, he said, "I don't know where they were driving her. I don't care where they were driving her. I'm just happy that she got there before the total phase of the eclipse." A year later, a total eclipse was to take place in July of 1991, which was known as the Big One. It was called the Big One because totality was going to last almost 7 minutes. In fact, it would be the longest total eclipse of the sun to be visible over the course of the next 150 some odd years. The eclipse would be at its best over Mexico, where you see these double asterisks, these red asterisks here. That was the maximum or greatest eclipse, again lasting almost 7 minutes. But I wasn't there. I was way over here near the beginning of the eclipse track, and if you look carefully enough, you can see that that is where the big island of Hawaii was. And the reason why I was all the way over there was that a cruise line, American Hawaii Cruises, hired me to be the person to be in charge of maneuvering the ship, which was the SS Independence, into the right area where the skies would be clearest. As you can see here, Joe Rao, meteorologist, who would position the SS Independence for the greatest possibility of seeing the spectacle. And this particular eclipse, you remember in Montana, we got to be chummy with the head of the National Weather Service in Montana. Well, in Honolulu, we visited the National Weather Service office in Honolulu, Hawaii, at the airport, and you could see that on the right is Hans Rosenthal, and even in Hawaii, they wear garish shirts in Honolulu. For Hawaii, it was Hawaii, and he would be providing us with latest weather updates through the time that we were on board the ship. And I told Hans, I said, there really doesn't seem to be any need for that and being concerned, because Honolulu and the big island of Hawaii has excellent credentials for good weather. Here you see the big island of Hawaii, which is really nothing more than almost like a gigantic volcanic cone. And here we have two mountains, Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea. And what happens is that during the month of July, the trade winds from the east blow. When they blow from the east, they interact with the tall mountains. The air is driven up along one side of the mountains, and all the moisture is wrung out of the air in the form of clouds, in the form of heavy-duty rain. Hilo, Hawaii, which is on the east side of the island, gets something like 300 inches of rain per year. But as the air goes up and over the top of the mountains and comes down the other side, the lee side of the mountains, the air is compressed and warmed by compression effects, and the clouds disappear, the rain disappears. And so on the western side of the island, skies are usually mostly sunny. And since the trade winds blow from the east in July 95% of the time, that seemed to mean that the chances of seeing the eclipse under a sunny, clear sky was about 95%. And we planned to park the ship right off of the west coast of the big island of Hawaii. However, this was one of those occasions where things did not seem to go right for two reasons. Number one, not necessarily meteorological, but geophysical. In the Philippines, a month earlier, June of 1991, a tremendous volcanic eruption occurred. Mount Pinatubo was the name of the volcano, which sent a tremendous cloud of ash and dust, an aerosol cloud, up into the sky, and within a month, it encircled much of the northern hemisphere. That means that the beautiful deep blue tropical skies that we were planning on seeing the eclipse in were not going to be so deep and blue. They would be kind of hazy. But still, we'd get a view of the sun, right? Well, at least that's what we thought. By the way, this ash cloud caused some beautiful sunrises and sunsets each evening. Look at that sky at sunset as we saw it from in and around the big island of Hawaii. That was one factor. The other factor was, remember I said 95% of the time it's sunny? What about the other 5%? Well, unfortunately, the other 5% reared its ugly head during the time of the eclipse. There was what meteorologists refer to as a TUT, a tropical upper tropospheric trough. And that TUT was causing widespread cloud cover, scattered showers. On the morning of the eclipse was going to begin at about 6:30 a.m. from our shipboard. And a few hours beforehand, it was drizzling on our ship. And here I was the one who was supposed to maneuver the ship into the proper position where skies would be clear so that the nearly 1,000 people on board the ship would be able to see the eclipse. A tremendous weight on my shoulders. And people in the years that have followed asked me, Joe, were you frightened? And I tell them, frightened? You are listening to a man who has laughed in the face of death, sneered at doom, chuckled at catastrophe. I was petrified. Absolutely, I didn't know what to do. Where could we go? What could we do to try to see the eclipse? And I made a phone call back on land to the weather service in Honolulu and spoke with Hans Rosenthal, who said, we are seeing on our satellite picture right now a hole, an opening in the clouds that is developing. It's plain as day. There it is. We can see it. And it looks like it's going to be continuing to open up. He says, what I would tell you is to tell the captain to head for that area in the Pacific Ocean. It's about 40 nautical miles from where you are right now, off the west coast of the Big Island. Head that in that direction. He said, this might be your salvation. So I told the captain, Captain Ha, about what I was just told by the weather service, and Captain Ha immediately turned the ship 90 degrees and went at full bore, 27 knots, toward that region where the skies presumably were beginning to clear. And sure enough, when we arrived there just after sunrise, the skies were clear. Here you see me, and also the back of my sister, who had a lot of hair back then, and we were looking out over another ship. That other ship was the sister ship of the Independence. That was the SS Constitution. You see, the ship that we were on, the Eclipse cruise, was completely sold out. And there was a long waiting list of people hoping to get on board if somebody dropped out. And Hawaii Cruises said, well, why don't we get the other ship, the Constitution, involved, and we'll put all the people, the surplus, the number of people who were waiting to get on board our ship on the other ship. And that's what they did. And on the morning of the eclipse, we simply radioed the Constitution, hey, we're headed here. And they gave the latitude and longitude, and we met up, and they parked, both ships were parked within a mile of each other to watch the solar eclipse. Here you see people on board our ship, the Independence, watching the partial stages. We watched, we waited, and then came totality. And totality, visible admittedly through some high clouds and a bit of haze, but there it was, the sun and the corona of the sun. And look down below. Look at all of this cloud cover. That, unfortunately, was the cloud cover that was over the big island of Hawaii with the TUT, the tropical upper troposphere trough. And so, sadly, the people who were there missed out. They were skunked. They missed out on the total eclipse of the sun because of that. Oh, boy, what are you going to do? The most spectacular part of the eclipse for me was what was called the seahorse prominence, a huge cloud of hydrogen gas lifting up off of the surface of the sun and visible across the dark disk of the sun, or the darkened disk of the moon. Again, a beautiful, beautiful sight. And we had celebrities on board the Independence. One of them on the left was one of the great science fiction writers of the time. His name was Frederick Pohl. And probably next to Isaac Asimov, Frederick Pohl was one of the most prolific science fiction writers of the day. And next to Fred was George Keen. He made his mark at the same eclipse that I saw in 1979 in Montana. George was at that eclipse as well in Montana, took a photograph which made the cover a few months later of Life magazine. And George was on board to tell all of us about how we could best photograph the eclipse if we cared to. And the person who I considered to be the celebrity on our trip was this man on the photo to my right, and that is Michael Collins, astronaut Michael Collins, who was the command module pilot on Apollo 11, the very first flight that would put men on the moon in July of 1969. And during the cruise, I got to know Mike Collins very well. In fact, one morning, I even had a chance to sit down with him for breakfast. Many refer to him as the forgotten astronaut because he was left by himself circling the moon in the command module while his colleagues Armstrong and Aldrin cavorted on the lunar surface. But to me, I was impressed by how gentle he was. No envy, no jealousy, no great desire to be anything greater than he was. And to me, certainly, he was, among all the people I've had the fortune of seeing and knowing in my lifetime, among the greatest. After the 91 eclipse, it would be another 7 years, and I would see another eclipse from shipboard. This time it was from Celebrity Cruise Line's Galaxy, very appropriate for an astronomy cruise, in February of 1998. The path of the eclipse went through the Pacific, over the Panama Canal, grazed northernmost sections of South America, Colombia, not going there, not after what happened in 77. And we parked just off the shore, just off the island of Montserrat, where there was a volcano which was burbling during the day of the eclipse. But a few months before this eclipse, I had the great fortune of being able to write a story in Reader's Digest, a story about my grandfather and how he got me hooked on eclipses, and the story about how, when I was just 7 years old, he taught me about what eclipses were and how he promised to take me to my very first total eclipse, which he did in 1972. Now, when you write for a magazine like Reader's Digest, read by 27 million people and printed in 19 different languages, you're likely to get some back talk, people writing to you, telling you how much they enjoyed or how much they found interesting of your story, of whatever you published in the magazine. And of all the letters and emails that I got in the wake of my story about the eclipse, the one that stands out was a note that I received from Miss Barbara M. Vargo of Rapid City, South Dakota, who wrote, "I was deeply touched by your story in Reader's Digest. I, too, saw that 1925 eclipse from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And she said, I'm enclosing something here that I have been carrying around with me for quite some time, and I've decided to pass it on to you, as I think you might make a better home for it. And what it was an original filter from that 1925 eclipse that cost one thin dime. She watched the eclipse of 1925 through it, and who knows, maybe my grandfather may have had a similar device when he saw the eclipse at the age of 16 from New York City. Now it was mine, and what I did was I took that with me to the February 1998 eclipse on board the ship, and I used that to look at the partial phases of the eclipse, and also I did it as a tribute to my grandfather. The eclipse itself was wonderful. We had a beautiful view, and at totality, look what popped out. To the right above the sun, the planet Mercury, and below the planet Jupiter, the biggest and smallest planets in the solar system, both appearing at the moment of total eclipse, and the sun itself showing off broad streamers, coronal streamers, on either side of the sun. A memorable, wonderful sight. In 2008, my friend Glenn, you remember him, he contacted a company in Dusseldorf, Germany, called Air-Events Polaflug. And what they did in Germany at this company was that 2 or 3 times a summer, they would take a plane from a charter flight from Air Berlin, LTU, and they would fly from Dusseldorf all the way up to the North Pole. And you'd fly around the North Pole, and then you'd fly back to Dusseldorf. The whole trip was about 12 hours long. And Glenn contacted this company and said, do you know that on August 1st of 2008, there's going to be a total eclipse up near the North Pole? And I think it might be worth your while to perhaps fly from Dusseldorf, and on the way, we could intercept the eclipse of the sun. And we could give passengers not only a chance to see the North Pole, but also a chance to see a total eclipse. And they went for it. They said, yeah, that would be great. And you see here a photograph of Glenn in the cockpit setting up his scientific equipment just before the eclipse. In order to get into the cockpit, again, this is post 9/11, the company hired Glenn. And so, being a member of the airline, Air Berlin, he was able to have access to the flight and the cockpit. And you see the window there where he was going to set up his cameras and equipment to track the sun. Now, the interesting thing about this is that about 10 days before the eclipse, Polaflu came to Glenn and said, you know, we're going to get a lot of publicity here in Europe, but nothing in the United States. Do you know somebody in the United States who might publicize this and tell everybody in the U.S. about what we're going to do? If you can find somebody like that, and if we approve, we'll allow that person to go on board, come on board the flight. And that was a pretty interesting offer, because you see, all the people who were on board were there to see the North Pole or to see the eclipse. And if you had a window seat, it would cost you upwards to like $10,000 or $12,000. And here they were telling Glenn that if they could find somebody from the news media to possibly promote the eclipse flight, they could go on for nothing. Glenn immediately got on the phone to me, said, what can you do? Can you publicize this in some way? Well, as I is now, way back then, I was a member of the American Museum of Natural History, Hayden Planetarium. The museum has a magazine, Natural History Magazine, which was founded 124 years ago in 1900. Its mission is to promote public understanding and appreciation of nature and science, and chronicles expeditions and research findings by staff members of the American Museum of Natural History and other museums as well. I contacted the magazine and said, I'm going to fly up to the North Pole, and on the way, we're going to encounter a total eclipse of the sun. Is that worthy of possibly having a feature article in the magazine? They said, yeah, do it. We'll be happy to publish something like that in the magazine. I went back to Glenn. Glenn went back to Polaflug. They told about the potential of having an article about the flight in a major science magazine. And before I know it, I was on board. And when I did get to the aircraft, the first thing that they handed out, and this was in Dusseldorf, Germany, was the boarding pass. And it went from Dusseldorf to a, quote, fictitious point somewhere out there up near the North Pole. And here was my window. My window. Now, the people who spent $10,000 and $12,000 had a seat, and they also had a nice, airline window. I, on the other hand, I didn't pay all that money, so they weren't going to waste a good seat that was worth a lot of money on me, who was on there for nothing. But they said, you'll be able to see the eclipse. Here's your window. And the window was on the emergency escape hatch. I'm sure many of you who have been on board a plane may have seen this hatch, something similar to it. The window, my window, was going to be a circle, roughly 3 inches in diameter. You say, well, how is it possible you're going to see much of anything out of a window like that? Or even take pictures? Well, let me tell you, yes, you can take good photographs. Here's a view of the diamond ring and the shadow of the moon on the clouds below. And with that, along with the fact of my experiences of seeing the eclipse, it was enough for me to write an article for Natural History. When we all got back, we took a group photograph in front of the plane. And here's yours truly there with his thumbs up, big smile on his face. When I got back home, I typed out the story for Natural History, which was in the October edition, 2008 edition of Natural History magazine. And here's the other thing. Somebody, I don't know to this day who it was, saw the article and said, this is a great article. We ought to put it up for a possible writing award. And that writing award was put out by the American Astronomical Society, the AAS. And believe it or not, I ended up winning that award from the Solar Physics Division, the 2008 SPD Popular Writing Award, which actually came with an honorarium. I didn't have to pay to be on the eclipse flight. I did have to pay money to fly from New York to Dusseldorf. And guess what? This award paid off the flight from New York to Dusseldorf. So more or less, I didn't pay anything to go, aside from my hotel room in Dusseldorf. And I owe it all to Glenn. Nothing like this would have happened if it weren't for the fact that he didn't put in a good word for me and allow me to get on board that special flight. In 2016, there was an eclipse over Indonesia, but I didn't want to go to Indonesia. I looked at the path of the eclipse and I saw that it was going to pass, get ready now, between Hawaii and Alaska. And remember what I did in 1990? Coerced American Transair. This time I didn't have to go to the library and spend a few hours with a big thick book. We had Expedia.com, we had Travelocity, and all these other flights online, these airline travel agencies. So within a relatively short interval of time, I did find an airline that flew from Anchorage, Alaska to Honolulu, which had a chance to intercept the eclipse, and that was Alaska Airlines. Alaska Airlines Flight 870 from Anchorage would go to Honolulu, and along the way, if they delayed the flight by this time only 25 minutes, they would get a chance to see the total eclipse. And there you see the flight, the track of the aircraft, and they made a big deal about it at Alaska Airlines. Glenn wrote the flight plan. The same way he wrote the flight plan for Polarflug up to the North Pole, he wrote another flight plan for Alaska Airlines. And they used that flight plan, followed it along in order for us to get up to the eclipse. The night before, myself and also some of my eclipse chasing buddies, and there were about 10 of them, we made reservations on board this flight. And here you see Captain, Captain Hal Anderson at a restaurant discussing what he was going to do the next day for the eclipse. Here I was at the airport with Captain Anderson that day, giving him some late weather, high-level wind information for the eclipse. And we also covered it at the TV station I was working at, News 12. And so here is the special report that I put together showing how we were able to see that eclipse from this regularly commercial airline flight. The passengers didn't know anything about it until they arrived at the airport that day. They were thinking that they were going to head to Hawaii, and that would be the peak or the top thing of their trip. They didn't know that they were going to see a spectacle of a total eclipse. And here's how we covered it on News 12.
Now to a News 12 special report. Not many people get the chance to see a solar eclipse from the air, but our chief meteorologist convinced a major airline to alter the path of one of its regularly scheduled flights to give passengers and crew a chance to experience an incredible celestial sight. Here's Joe Rao's remarkable story, Into the Eclipse.
Oh my God, look at it. Here comes the shadow. Look at that. It's like a tornado. Oh my God, here we go.
Exclamations of wonder from a person witnessing a sight that few people in their lifetime ever get a chance to see. This is the shadow of the moon streaking silently over the Pacific Ocean at 7,000 miles per hour, about to rendezvous with a commercial jet aircraft just prior to the start of the most awe-inspiring sight the heavens can offer, a total eclipse of the sun.
Totality! Totality!
But it was the circumstances of how this flight came about that garnered national attention.
We are about to embark on a trip that a lot of people are calling historic here. Now, a second ago, I spoke to the man who actually did this whole process. A year ago, Joe Rao noticed that this path of the eclipse was going to cross between Hawaii and Alaska, and he contacted Alaska Air to make this special flight happen.
And that's how, in the dead of winter, I found myself heading to Ted Stevens International Airport in beautiful Anchorage, Alaska, on a day where the Alaskan mountains sparkle and plane tickets promised Hawaii. Waiting for me at the gate was Captain Hal Anderson of Alaska Airlines, who was going to pilot our journey into darkness.
It's a rare privilege to see a total eclipse, particularly from 37,000 feet.
I think Alaska Airlines should be congratulated because most other airlines just give you an in-flight movie. We're going to go one better than that, much better than that. We're going to give you a chance to see something you may never see again, a total solar eclipse. That's the promise I made to all the passengers as we boarded a packed 737 jet en route to Honolulu, where the in-flight entertainment began with a pair of eclipse safety glasses. And soon, everyone on board began to get into place for the big show in the sky. The dark silhouette of the moon was about to begin crossing directly in front of the disk of the sun. First, just a small bite cutting into the bottom of the sun. And as the minutes ticked off, that bite became progressively larger, and larger, and larger still, cutting the sun down to a narrow crescent. In the final moments before totality, just like curtain time before a Broadway play, the light rapidly dimmed. Then, 700 miles north of Honolulu, the main event. Sun, moon, plane, perfectly aligning for a perfect moment.
Perfect timing. Perfect timing. Once in a lifetime view.
Time just stopped. The eclipse was frozen above us, like a phenomenal photograph pasted on the dome of the sky. The incredible corona, the crown of the sun, was now in full view. Study of this solar atmosphere is one of the main scientific benefits from an eclipse. More is being learned about the corona all the time. Some believe it may have an effect on the Earth's weather. But time was not standing still. After just 113 seconds, the moon's movement brought forth a second sunrise, ending the late afternoon darkness that had stretched across the horizon. And the passengers were still in awe.
You could see that thing coming at you, both sides of it, like a blanket being thrown toward your face.
I have never seen one before, and it was spectacular, especially when the moon was totally over the sun.
Spectacular and eerie at the same time. Most on board soon came to realize that for them, such an amazing sight may never come again, proving that age-old saying is true. Why worry about your destination when the journey looks like this? Joe Rao, News 12, airborne above the North Pacific.
I apologize for that little brief delay midway through the video, but here you see all of my friends, and once again, Craig was there with his Eclipse flag. It was a great, great view, and Alaska Airlines got such tremendous publicity from this flight that the next year they asked Glenn and myself to help them put together a special charter flight with members of the news media and also contest winners for the great American eclipse that occurred across the United States in 2017. There you see a big view of the flight plan that Glenn again wrote up for them, showing how we flew out about 1,000 miles to the west of the Oregon coastline to intercept the shadow of the moon for this eclipse. Glenn decided, you see him there on the left, he decided that he was going to stay on the ground. He went to Madras, Oregon to be with his daughter, who's next to him, Maya, and he wanted to get a view of the eclipse from terra firma, if you will, from down on the ground. But I was going to be on board that flight, and here you see at the news conference before all of us got on board the flight, giving information and answering questions from the press of this event, and on board, still answering questions from members of the press, international as well as nationally, talking about what we were going to see. Here again is Captain Anderson on the right and Captain Holm on the left. I don't understand how they can fly a plane. Look at all of those gizmos and gadgets and knobs and switches and screens to fly, but they're getting their act together just before the flight to try to intercept the eclipse, which we did. And there you see a picture of me looking at the eclipse through my window with binoculars. It was a great, great view, solar eclipse 17. Even better was the fact that I got a chance to share it with members of my family, my wife Renata, and there is my daughter Maria, who is a speech pathologist, and my son. You remember him? He wasn't born yet when I did a flight in 1990 for an eclipse, but there he is, and today he is in his 10th year of teaching high school physics at a school near our home here in the Hudson Valley of New York State. I just want to, before I close, I want to dedicate this talk to three people. Number one, my grandfather, who of course got me started on this chase of eclipses. He passed away in 1993, but I will always remember him driving nearly 1,000 miles to take me up to Canada to see that. He said, "I'll bet you'll remember this day for as long as you live," and he was right. I never will forget that miraculous day or the man of blunted dreams who had awakened in me a deep awe of the universe and a sense of my own possibilities. My mom, who only passed away a year ago at the age of 90, she was always encouraging me to study science, purchasing books on space and astronomy for birthday and Christmas gifts, and frequently taking me on visits to the Hayden Planetarium in Manhattan. And lastly, my almost lifelong friend, a friend of over 50 years, Glenn Schneider, who once wrote, "If you want to experience the ultimate in human emotion, curiosity, imagination, then see a total eclipse of the sun. Even if you are starving, in hock, in trouble with the law, unbalanced and addicted, see it anyway. It's worth it." And I want to wish all of you, if you plan to stay at your home in Western Massachusetts, see just the partial eclipse, or if you plan to trek into the zone of totality on that second Monday in April coming up, and I hope all of you do, because again, it's an event of a lifetime, a bucket list event. I wish you all good luck and clear skies. Thanks very much, and if you have any questions now, I'll be very happy to answer them for you. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Joe. Does anybody have any questions? You can unmute and go ahead and ask.
Hello. Do you have a time for well, that won't be totality, but it'll be like 90% in Manhattan on that day?
Yes, it will be 91%. 91%, and that eclipse will be reaching its peak at 3:25 that afternoon in New York City. And it will begin about 75 minutes before and finish out about 75 minutes after that maximum time at 3:25. And again, 91%. So even if it's a bright sunny day, on that day it will appear for a couple of minutes around the time of peak eclipse like a cloudy, hazy day, because the amount of sunlight that is going to be diminished will make it look a little like a counterfeit twilight, or a little shady, if you will. But to get the full effect of a total eclipse, a jaw-dropping experience, you can watch literally it go from daytime to 40 minutes after sunset or 40 minutes before sunrise, that kind of light level, in a matter of, let's say, less than a minute's time, and see stars and see the corona of the sun shining out beyond the blackened disk of the moon, and sunset and sunrise colors rimming the horizon. An amazing sight, and I do hope you get a chance to see that. That is where you would see if you were in totality. I see one person here saying, hoping to see the eclipse in San Antonio. And San Antonio is actually on the edge of totality. So if you do go to San Antonio, try to get a little ways to the north and west of the city, where you'll be deeper into the shadow, because if you go to the south and east, you'll end up being outside of the zone of totality by just a little bit. Again, San Antonio is right on the edge of the total phase of the eclipse.
When can you take your glasses off?
When the sun is completely covered. When the sun is, when we have what is called the diamond ring, when there's the last little bit of sunlight disappearing behind the mountains and valleys of the moon, that's when you can take your glasses off. And when you do that, you'll see that little blob of lingering sunlight slowly disappearing, and at the same time, the innermost part of the corona appears, and so what appears in the sky to you is something that resembles a diamond ring in the sky. After you take your glasses off, you can keep them off through totality. The only time you don't need your solar glasses or need to use a projection method to look at the sun is during the total phase of the eclipse. But as soon as the sun begins to re-emerge, 2, 3, 4 minutes later, that's when you have to put the shields or glasses back on, because during the partial phases of the eclipse, the sun is brilliantly bright, and that's when you need to use protection. Some people say, I'll use a pair of sunglasses. They're very, very dark. And indeed, if you use the sunglasses, you may darken the sun enough so that you'll be able to look at it. But at the same time, while the sun appears dark, what's coming through those sunglasses, and you're not immediately aware of it, are the infrared and ultraviolet radiations. The infrared interacts with your black-top driveway and helps melt the snow. The ultraviolet gives you a sunburn after 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Those rays are going right into your eyes and onto your retina and slowly burning your eyes without you being immediately aware of it. That's why we say don't use regular sunglasses. Use either the special solar glasses that are available online, or I believe the library here will be handing those out. Use those glasses. They are safe. They are certified to be safe. Or again, project the image using either a cardboard box, or you can see under a tree how the projected images appear, the crescent images down on the ground beneath the tree, dappling the ground. But during totality, no protection is needed. That's the only time that you can look directly at the sun during the total phase of the eclipse. And by the way, the next time we'll get a chance to see a total eclipse as close to our part of the country will be on the 1st of May in the year 2079.
Oh.
The eclipse will be total in New York and in Boston. So I don't know how many of you plan to be around here 55 years from now, but good luck.
Yeah, and if anybody does want to pick up some glasses, some eclipse glasses, we do have plenty at the library. So please feel free to come on by.
And again, I just want to thank all of you for coming and listening, and I hope you learned something, and I keep your fingers crossed. Let's hope that the weather it will be good so that we'll be able to enjoy this very special sight on the 8th of April. It's only 25 days away.
Yeah. All right, Joe. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. And I hope to see you all at the library very soon.
Bye-bye, folks. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.